Hello and welcome to this edition of De Facto Review, a weekly roundup of the biggest stories shaping Mongolia. Here with us tonight is guest commentator and analyst Badrul Bonto, Mongto Badrul Bonto. And I'm Terrence Edwards. We're live on Facebook at V Television. We want to hear your thoughts, so send us comments on Twitter with hashtag #jargle_defacto. Coming up on the program. Parliament overturns President's veto against Finance Minister appointment. 2017 presidential candidate Senhu Gambatar found guilty of graft. Ernest TT resolves development bank debt. Tech company to IPO to raise funds for data center at Darhan. I just want to make a quick note on the graphic. The second topic said Gambatar arrested. It should have read Gambatar found guilty. Sorry for any confusion out there. Let's get started. Parliament has overturned President Haltma Batulga's veto of the cabinet appointment for Mongolia's new finance minister. Batulga vetoed the appointment of Finance Minister Chimed Hurlbatar because of alleged conflicts of interest and a one-time bonus granted to teachers worth 300,000 tugriks each. The bonus was granted after weeks of protest by doctors and teachers. Batulga has not been hesitant to use his veto powers, as he also this week vetoed the budget amendment that was passed by Parliament. So, Mogi, get started. It seems strange that Batulga would actually come out against a bonus to civil servants. Usually his platform has been more about economic and social justice and more distribution of wealth. So which side actually do you agree with in this situation?
Well, he vetoed it, well, according to him, he vetoed it because he wants more for teachers, actually.
Okay.
And that 300...
Not generous enough.
Not generous enough. And he wanted more for teachers, for doctors, in the form of actual salary increases, not just the one-time, one-off bonuses.
Okay.
Which will only, help in the short term, but still, teachers and doctors will still be underpaid. So he wanted actually more from it. And he vetoed the budget bill because of the same reason. I mean, because this $300,000 tugrik bonus, which is going to be for all civil servants, not just teachers and doctors, universal to all 192,000 civil servants. So he used the same reason to veto the finance minister, and he used the same reason to veto the budget bill. And because of this, a lot of teachers who were expecting, civil servants who were expecting to get 300,000 tugriks this week, starting from Monday probably, I assume, are in limbo because Parliament has to debate whether to accept the president's veto or not. Within 2 weeks, as far as I understand, but I'm sure Parliament will try to discuss it as early as possible. So perhaps as early as Wednesday, we'll have a Parliament. I'm sure they'll overturn the veto, but they'll have to wait until probably even next week to get that 300,000 tugrik bonuses.
You know, watching this situation roll out, it seems that the president is not going to sit back and be a passive head of state. He's definitely going to be more active, and he's making that known. So whether or not his actual position on these things, it does certainly make a statement. Now, the president wanted more generous benefits. In your opinion, is that something Mongolia could actually shoulder at this point with its economic conditions?
Obviously we cannot. Not just because we don't have the money, and also because, more importantly, because it would be in breach of the IMF agreement. So apparently the government is talking to IMF, trying to get their approval to increase civil servant salaries, but I'm sure IMF will be very hesitant to even discuss this issue. So that means the government, by the IMF deal, cannot increase civil servant salaries until 2019. So even next year as well. So which is, it's not going to go well with the teachers' union, the doctors' union, because they're even threatening strikes. As far as I understand, the teachers announced a national strike on November 13th, an actual strike.
Okay.
Previous ones were one-off protests, but
So there are teachers in the classroom that day?
There will be, yes. So previous one was announced last Monday, but at the last minute they called off the strike. 1,000 teachers were about to strike last Monday, but it was stopped at last minute because they came to the table and started talking again. And because there's a new finance minister, there's a new minister of Social Security, new education minister, so there was new faces to the negotiating team. So that's why they called it off. But I don't think they will call it off next time if Parliament doesn't do anything. And government is sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because on one side, the teachers and doctors are rightfully, in my mind, demanding more payment because their actual real salaries has been falling with
the depreciation,
right,
Turek and inflation,
and the currency rate as well, FX risk as well.
Yeah.
So they're rightfully demanding their salaries to increase. But on the other hand, we have a deal with the IMF to
Not
try
do
to
such
recover
things,
to try to recover the economy as fast as possible. So both of them are demanding things that are impossible.
Yeah. Well, I think the real losers here will be the students if they miss some school out of it.
Obviously, yes.
It is a bit of a class issue too, because obviously private schools won't be affected. They have their
that is true.
Yeah. So it is a sad situation.
Right.
So going back to these vetoes,
Mm-hmm.
I understand that President Betolga and the Prime Minister Hurlbater are quite friendly, but sorry, Hurlsuk, pardon. They're quite friendly. So a lot of people thought perhaps the Prime Minister and the President might be aligned on a lot of issues, but perhaps not. What do you think?
Well, they might have a friendly relationship, but at the end of the day, both of them are politicians. They're not going to do anything against opposite parties on top of it. And they're politicians, extremely experienced politicians. So, everything they do will be within to increase their political, image. So that doesn't mean I don't think they're gonna stop being friends because they're just,
it's business.
Politics is politics.
Yeah, it's politics.
They'll just pat each other, hug each other and say politics, politics. I'm sure.
Sure.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it might be a good thing that the Prime Minister and the President from different parties are friends, as far as people understand, to get some important things decided, but they won't stop doing politics because of it.
In Mongolia's past governments, this adversarial positions have definitely hurt it, definitely hurt its economy even. So if they can get on the same page and work more collaboratively, I think it would definitely be welcomed by not only the people, but foreign investors.
Of course, definitely.
Moving forward. Former independent MP and Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party presidential nominee Sanhun Ganbatar has been accused of receiving 50 million won, that's $44,000 US, from a South Korean citizen during the 2017 presidential election. Ulaanbaatar's Bayan Zurich District Criminal Court found Ganbatar, the deputy chairman of the MPRP, guilty of bribery on 30th of October. According to News.mn, the judge fined the former candidate 1.4 million Tugrek and is confiscating the donated funds. So the OSCE and media noted that this past presidential election was particularly nasty. There was a lot of mudslinging and accusations of corruption coming from all sides. So it's funny that only this one candidate, the third party candidate, has any repercussions following. So what do you make of this fact, and do you think justice is being fairly distributed?
Obviously, of course, selective enforcement of the law is a major issue in Mongolia, of course.
Sure.
Ruling parties tend to use law enforcement, anti-corruption agencies for their own political gains, and it goes vice versa. When the other party wins, they start investigating the other side. But at the end of the day, investigating each other more for corruption, I think it bodes well for Mongolia in the long run,
Yeah.
because there'll be less inclinations or chances for easy bribery. If you want to get bribed for something, it's going to get even tougher and tougher. And that's the way it should go. Selective enforcement, of course, is an issue. But for Gambatur's case, it's interesting because the decision, obviously, the decision comes after the election, and the court ordered the election commission to remove him from the candidate lists. So I'm not sure what that does to the results of the legitimacy of the presidential election itself. Obviously, there was a video surfaced of him talking to that Korean citizen, and in the conversation there were talks of money, and that was, I think, a major evidence behind the court. So they will send the court sent a letter demanding him removed.
Yeah.
So we have to wait what the election commission actually makes of it and decides to do after they received it. I'm sure there will be a time where they have to come up with a decision. But more importantly, what does that do to the result of the election? If Gambatur didn't run, and MPRP being a major political party with a seat in parliament, they might have selected a new candidate, maybe, perhaps. Or even if Gambatur could not run, what if he decided to throw himself to support one of the candidates, let's say Engbold, the one who lost, and maybe even in the first round, results would have been different.
Yeah. Well, he did end up actually supporting the so-called white ballot cause.
Right. And what if he supported the white ballot thing from the very beginning? Would that have
any effect? Yeah, of course.
On the results as well. So the whole election result is now sort of in disarray. So the election commission will have to come up with a statement saying what they make of the court decision. And on top of it, Gambatur could appeal the court decision. And so there's still time for the final court decision. If appeals court, maintains the decision, he might appeal to the Supreme Court. So
yeah.
The court process is not over. Gambatur hasn't indicated, as far as I know, if he will appeal or not. So we'll have to wait and see.
It's also worth noting that as elected officials, the president has some immunity.
Right. Yes.
As well as Mr. Engbold, the parliament speaker.
As a member of parliament, he has immunity, yes.
He has an immunity. Mm-hmm. So there is a chance that this could still be followed up on after they come out of power, or?
Of course. There's a chance. If one loses if one member of parliament loses an election, he'll be up for any kind of law, court decision, but which rarely. Never really happens. So.
It would be a long way to look back from Mongolia. It could be one or two terms for the president.
The former president was arrested and jailed because of past dealings as a president.
But those weren't election related.
That is true. That is true. Yeah.
Okay. And for Gambatur, do you think this is the end of his political career? Or can he make a comeback?
No, not at all. I think he's smart enough to use this to even do more politics, saying that the establishment is out to get the third-party candidates, the real people's representative is being, political persecution, that kind of stuff. I think so. He knows how to use it to his advantage. So it's not his end of his career by a long shot.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely have to keep watching. As you said, this is something that will be ongoing. Yeah. We'll have the appeals process.
Right, and the election commission will have to come up with a statement if they accept the court ruling or not.
Okay, moving on to our third story. The state-owned miner of Mongolia's largest coal mine, Ernest Talventolga, reported this week it had repaid $100 million owed to the Development Bank of Mongolia. Ernest TT's board agreed to repay half the $200 million debt in advance of the date the sum was owed. That's what the company said in a statement. The Development Bank loan was provided by distributing cash to the public through the Human Development Fund in accordance with a 2012 government resolution. So let's take a trip down memory lane and let's rewind the clock and see why exactly RNSTT actually had to take out this loan?
Well, the DBM loan is not the only loan it has. You know,
Yeah.
obviously, it had a big pre-coal payment from Chalco, which they finally settled this year after, what, 5 years now? And they have a bunch of other loans from commercial banks as well. So they're not anywhere near handling their debt situation anywhere near the situation. So, but they took out a loan. The Chalco money was used. Was supposed to, UNCT was supposed to use it for their own coal operations, which they didn't. They gave it, as you've mentioned, they gave it all to the Human Development Fund, which the Human Development Fund used to distribute cash.
That fund still exists?
It still exists, but it's not doing anything. It has no money to distribute. It has a lot of, what do you call it, money owed to them. So the government owes the Human Development Fund because they took out a lot of their money to do other stuff, and a bunch of other people owe the Human Development Fund a lot of money. So that's why that fund is the first, what you can call a sovereign wealth fund, created by Mongolia. But the purpose of it was not to save money for the rainy days. It was to distribute money specifically to, well, their goal was, the fund's goal is to alleviate poverty by giving welfare to the needed. But obviously they use it to distribute cash to all 303 million citizens.
And it basically became an election tool.
Of course. Like all things in Mongolia, things are created, established for good reasons, and then obviously misused and then turns out that's totally opposite against their the goals of being established.
Okay, getting back to the matter at hand, where did Ernest Helventalga come up with this cash if it's had so many financial difficulties over in years?
Well, that is an interesting question. One sort of a financial analyst on Twitter said, how did they come up with this kind of cash? Because as ETT publishes their financial reports, and in the first half financial report, they had like $5 or $6 million in cash. So it's interesting how they come up with that cash. Obviously in the first half, coal export was good. ETT obviously benefited during that period. But where did that money come from all those coal sales? Did they get it after June? Did they get it in July? All of the coal they sold in the first 6 months? So that's also a situation I think we need to put a closer eye on. But obviously, where did they come up with that money is obviously the coal export business. Export has been good in the first half. But in the second half, coal export actually is dropping because of the bottleneck at the border. So their second half will not be good. So they might have settled 100 million, but it won't be in the second half that they settled the other debts because of bad sales. So
do you suppose it might have been an issue of language? Because the statement said that it had repaid the 100 million. Is it possible it was forgiven by the DBM?
I wouldn't assume so. I think that would be a very strange, illegal, and
so it'd be a problem.
It'd be a problem. So it just says that if they had 100 million, were they keeping it somewhere else or not in their bank accounts, or did the buyers pay later and not in the first half, but maybe in July and August? So that's a situation I think we need to put a closer eye on. But coal sales have been good in the first half. So, but where was that money?
I know it's often a complaint from you. Mongolia doesn't learn enough lessons from its missteps.
Right.
This misstep would be basically not bankrupting, but making it very difficult for RNSTT to operate. So what lessons can we take away from that?
These state-owned companies, some advocates of state-owned companies say, oh, look at Norway or places where the state-owned
countries much farther down the road in their development.
saying that these guys are able to run state-owned companies and do good, so why can't we? But like you said, the level of development, level of transparency, governance is far and long. So in these times, I think it's better to the state to privatize businesses.
Yeah.
And it's strange that the government is competing with private companies for. In this case, they were compete with other private companies working in the same
Little TT,
deposit.
Mongolian Mining Corporation.
Right. So, what situation is going to be great when the government is competing with the private business for the same kind of business? So,
I also understand Ernest TT had the rock bottom prices were dragging down prices for the whole coal region.
Right, and they sell their coal raw at their cheap money prices.
Yeah.
I believe they sell it at around $50 right now.
That's the contracted price with Chelco?
Contractor price was index based.
Okay.
So when coal prices were down, it was down.
Yeah.
So
again, but the point is, this is having a ripple effect on the industry.
Of course. And it's not just Ernest TT where government competes with other business. We have a state-owned bank that competes with commercial private banks. So the kind of level of development Mongolia has, I think it's best to leave the business to the private sector and try to increase our own government governance.
You make a fair point there. Mongolia makes so much talk about privatizing its assets and basically written lists and amended those lists. We've seen assets such as Torin Bank, as you just mentioned, but no action's ever been made. It would be a good step for Mongolia because not only would you have perhaps better governance, but you would also have more activity on Mongolia's stock exchanges with the things that are listed there.
Of course.
Yeah.
Mongolian Stock Exchange obviously was created because of privatization, so it's best, like you said, to privatize everything through the stock exchange.
Yeah, there are some assets that the government talked about auctioning off, but these large companies,
right. Well,
they should.
The ones that they wanted to auction were things like a spa resort, which wouldn't make sense to sell it on the stock exchange.
Of course, yeah, whatever makes sense.
Right.
That I think is a good idea.
Right.
Okay, we're going to go up to our last story of the evening. A new tech company called iTools plans to list more than a third of its shares on the Mongolia Stock Exchange for this year's first IPO.
Right.
Founded in 2011, the company plans to sell 38.8% equity to raise funds for a new data center at Mongolia's second largest city, Darkhan. So, pretty late in the game to do its first IPO of the year, but it's happening,
right.
So good to hear. Let's talk about the significance of this deal. Why is it important that it's selling shares on the stock exchange rather than borrowing the cash to build this data center? And what does this mean for other tech companies in Mongolia?
Well, sure. I mean, a company that's going to build a major development obviously needs cheap money, so it wouldn't make sense to borrow it at a high rate. So, and it's a welcoming IPO for Mongolian Stock Exchange, which hasn't seen an IPO I think for 4 or 5 years now. The stock exchange has been dry for 4 years, so it's a good thing.
There's been some cement companies, yes?
Yeah, but the last one was I forgot the name,
Hutul?
but
Was it Hutul?
no, Hutul is already it was a state-owned company. That's,
okay.
So it's a welcoming thing for Mongolian
Sure.
Stock Exchange and iTools. It's an interesting company. I talked to the director, and the reason why they're building in Darkhan is because for safety reasons. Every other data center is located in UB, so Mongolia is not prone to earthquakes, but Mongolia is situated in a dangerous earthquake area.
Yeah, it's an interesting issue because there's no fault underneath the city, but it's still rumbles.
Sort of not in the safest place for earthquakes.
Yeah.
So if all the data information is in UB, that's a dangerous thing. And Bank of Mongolia is actually requiring all commercial banks to have a backup data center 200 kilometers away from the city, because of earthquakes, companies lose their data, and these days, companies rely on data to would do business.
Sure.
He gave me an example where in 2011 there was a couple of earthquakes in New Zealand, and because of the earthquakes, 600 companies went bankrupt because they all lost their data. They did not have a backup. And Japan goes through the same things with their earthquakes as well. And interestingly, when the airplanes hit the Twin Towers as well, a lot of financial companies went bankrupt because they did not have a backup center. So for this specific safety, security issue, having a data center in Darkhang made sense.
Yeah.
And UB in Darkhang is connected by high-speed fiber optic cables, so there's no issue of speed. And it's also saving us money, well, keeping money from going abroad.
Yeah.
Mongolia, he told me that spends $3 million on foreign hosting for websites.
Okay.
And iTools.
That's a lot of money lost. Then.
That's a lot of money lost. And on top of that, all the internet data we buy from abroad, $15 million is spent every year by Mongolia to buy data that we use for our internet and Wi-Fi's.
Sure.
So that will also help with keeping, replacing some of the money that goes abroad. So it's an interesting business.
And do you think any impact on the Darhan economy?
I'm sure.
Jobs?
I'm sure. I'm not sure how much people the Darkhang data center would employ,
Yeah.
but it obviously Darkhang, as a historic industrial city, has been losing some of its glory after 1990. So more businesses and factories and things to be.
Yeah,
settled
very
in.
few industry.
Right.
Yeah.
It'll be good for Darkhang and helping with the UB overcrowding situation.
Yeah, it'll definitely be good to see some business go there. However, Mongolia's tax code brings most of the taxes collected not to the cities where it's taken, but straight to the Ulaanbaatar again. So
Right.
unfortunately, Darhan won't receive as many direct benefits as we might have hoped.
I'm not sure how they're structured their company.
Yeah.
Maybe it is a Darhan-based company that's owned by the parent company. I'm not sure, but
Okay.
but a direct benefit would be the employees they will hire.
Yeah, I think that's pretty great though.
Right?
That's our show for the evening. We hope our briefings give you a leg up as you start the new work week on Monday. Any final thoughts, Mogi?
Well, I'm very curious what the election commission will say,
Yeah.
and how would that affect the election results, and what would Parliament do? Would they accept the veto or not? It's never a boring week in Mongolia.
Yeah. So that's our show for the evening. Good night, Ulaanbaatar.
Good night.